Ever felt that little internal pushback? You know, when someone questions something you hold really dear, maybe it's, I don't know, how your favorite sports team is run, or maybe a belief you've held for like years. It's like there's this invisible force field around it. Feels almost untouchable.
Yeah, that feeling, it sort of gets at something really fundamental, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This whole idea of the sacred.
Right. And when we hear sacred, I think, you know, our minds often jump straight to religion, holy books, rituals, that kind of thing.
Sure.
But what our sources really highlight is that the sacred is actually much broader. It's anything we set apart, right?
Yeah.
Anything we invest with deep meaning and treat with reverence or maybe deference.
Exactly. Think religious symbols, yes. But
Wow.
also things like national flags, anthems, even deeply personal stuff like old family photos or heirlooms.
Yeah.
And because we give these things such weight, such significance, there's this natural hesitation. We don't really want to scrutinize them too closely. There's almost this feeling that they have a kind of power that just demands respect, you know, a boundary we don't want to cross. Our essay actually touches on this idea of taboo.
Like a guardrail.
Yeah, like a guardrail for the sacred, exactly.
Which I think brings us to you, listening right now. You're someone who likes to understand things, who isn't afraid to dig a bit deeper.
Right.
And you've probably been in situations where questioning something held as sacred, whether by others or even yourself, felt both really necessary and, honestly, a bit risky.
Precisely. And that's really the heart of what we're digging into today. This isn't about, just tearing things down.
No.
It's about figuring out how to navigate the complexities when we critique the sacred. We've got this really insightful essay that lays the groundwork, and then we'll be diving into two pretty provocative songs.
Very different songs.
Very different, yeah. Both taking these bold satirical angles on subjects many, many people consider sacred.
Okay, so we have this essay that kind of unpacks what sacred even means and how we critique it, and then we get to really get into these two fascinating musical examples. And as always, our expert is here to give us that crucial context and analysis.
Happy to be here.
All right, so let's start at the beginning then. What are the sort of fundamental characteristics? What makes something sacred?
Well, fundamentally, the sacred is set aside. It's separate. It's imbued with this really profound meaning, often inspiring a sense of, awe or deep respect.
Right.
Think of religious texts people believe they hold ultimate truths, or temples spaces dedicated purely to worship. National anthems evoke that shared identity feeling.
Right.
Flags represent core national values. And then, like you said, on a personal level, maybe just a worn-out photograph can hold this incredibly powerful emotional link to the past.
And like we touched on, these things often have this layer of taboo around them. It's like there's an unspoken rule, or sometimes, a very spoken one, that certain things just aren't okay to question or treat lightly.
Precisely. But here's where it gets really interesting, I think. Our essay makes this vital point. Just because something has that sacred status doesn't automatically put it beyond examination.
Okay.
In fact, for people who value open inquiry, exploring the sacred isn't just acceptable, it becomes essential.
Why is that?
Well, the essay argues that without this critical lens, we risk just falling into blind acceptance or, maybe more dangerously, allowing the sacred to become a shield for, harmful actions or beliefs. At the end of the day, the sacred isn't always about inherent holiness. Often it's really just about protected power.
So it's a real balancing act then, isn't it? Critique can be risky, definitely, but sometimes it's absolutely vital. Let's talk about when this kind of critique can be particularly fraught. When can it really go wrong?
Yeah, the essay points out a few key dangers. One is when critique slides into incitement, when it actually fuels violence or hatred, maybe by dehumanizing a group but dressing it up as satire.
Yeah.
Another is when it's just dismissive without any real understanding, just mocking something deeply meaningful to others without even trying to grasp why it matters to them. And finally, it's really problematic when it's used to sort of punch down to further marginalized communities that are already vulnerable rather than challenging those who actually hold the power.
Those are really crucial distinctions. Okay, so on the flip side, when does critiquing the sacred become maybe an act of courage or even a necessity?
The essay argues it's essential when it challenges traditions that cause harm or when it exposes hypocrisy.
Okay.
When institutions or individuals use that untouchable aura of the sacred to just dodge accountability, well, then critical examination becomes paramount.
Yeah.
And humor, especially satire, can be this really potent tool for revealing uncomfortable truths in a way that maybe direct confrontation can't. The essay mentions figures like Lenny Bruce, George Carlin, Hannah Gatsby.
Right, classic examples.
Exactly. Artists who use their platforms to really challenge societal norms, often facing, significant backlash for it.
Absolutely. And this brings us to a really nuanced area. The difference between critique, satire, and mockery. These terms get thrown around a lot, often interchangeably, but they carry very different weight, don't they?
They really do. And the essay helps clarify this. So critique is presented more as analysis, right? Aimed at understanding or maybe improving something. The intention is generally meant to be constructive.
Okay.
Satire uses humor, irony, exaggeration, ridicule to expose flaws or hypocrisy or absurdity, ideally trying to illuminate something.
Right, to make a point.
And make a point. Whereas mockery, well, that's really rooted in ridicule and belittlement. The main goal there is often just to diminish or shame something or someone.
And the essay points to South Park as kind of an interesting, if sometimes controversial, example of how these can blend together.
Yeah.
Sometimes it offers really sharp social commentary, right? But other times it seems to just veer into plain mockery, occasionally targeting groups that maybe aren't in power.
Exactly. It really underscores how much the intention behind it and who the target is really matters.
He does.
Which leads us nicely into this complex landscape of taboo topics. What's considered off-limits varies so much. And even now, with things seemingly more open, certain subjects still trigger, significant discomfort.
We're talking about things like sex, violence, religion, politics.
Yeah.
That sort of territory.
Precisely. The essay notes that sex, for instance, despite being so fundamental to, human life, often remains surprisingly taboo in public discussion.
Still. Yeah.
Certain words, certain images can still make people deeply uneasy, often because of deeply ingrained moral codes or maybe even historical trauma related to it.
And violence, weirdly, is often more normalized, isn't it? Especially in media and entertainment.
It's a strange paradox. We can often watch fictional violence with less discomfort than we watch fictional sexuality.
Then there's religion. For so many people, it's profoundly sacred, yet it's also a really frequent target for satire, especially in more secular circles.
Right. And as the essay points out, while that satire can highlight contradictions or maybe abuses of power within religious institutions,
it can also be deeply offensive.
Deeply offensive to those who hold those beliefs sacred. Absolutely.
And finally, politics, which, gosh, in our current climate, often feels incredibly polarized. Humor and critique there.
Yeah.
It's tricky ground.
Very tricky. If it's done poorly, it can just deepen the divides that are already there. But the essay suggests when it's executed thoughtfully, it might actually offer a much needed bit of perspective.
Okay, so getting to the heart of it. Is it okay? Is it all right to poke fun at sacred things? The essay seems to lean towards yes, but with a big but. It all comes down to intentionality.
That's the absolute key. Humor, parody, even a bit of irreverence, they have this long history as really powerful tools for revealing truths. They can be liberating, they can help in healing, and they can definitely stimulate critical thought. But, and this is what the essay really hammers home, they can also inflict harm, create division, or alienate people if they're not used responsibly.
And to help guide that responsibility, the essay offers some really useful questions we should probably ask ourselves before we engage in that kind of critique. These really made me stop and think.
Yeah, they're designed to make us more self-aware. First, what's your aim? What are you actually trying to achieve? Are you genuinely trying to understand something better? Are you trying to challenge established power dynamics? Or are you maybe just looking to get a reaction?
Right.
Second, and this is crucial, are you punching up, scrutinizing those in positions of power? Or are you punching down at groups that are more vulnerable?
Big difference.
Huge difference. It's also vital to ask, do I actually understand what this thing means to other people? Do I get its significance before I try to critique it? Is my critique informed, or is it just based on, like, a superficial glance? And finally, am I willing to make space for nuance and complexity? Even when I'm dealing with subjects I might personally find absurd or even harmful.
These are fantastic points for anyone to keep in mind, really, whether you're an artist, a commentator, or just, having conversations day to day.
Absolutely.
And now, let's see how these principles actually play out in practice. We're going to dig into our first case study. This song called MOAT 666, What's the Precedent for the President? It's from the Pink album.
Okay, yeah. This one plunges us straight into political satire. It's a very clear critique of a specific political figure. Undeniable, focusing on themes like alleged corruption, misconduct, authoritarian tendencies, hypocrisy, and what the analysis calls the cult of personality around this individual.
And the lyrics are pretty direct, aren't they? They reference things like a gifted 400 mil, 34 felonies, accusations of sexual misconduct, even specific foreign policy stuff like pulling out of the Paris Agreement and sending Kim love letters. It also touches on domestic things, government shutdown, immigrant intolerance, and accuses abuse of power through Congress threats. It's pretty comprehensive. Sharp.
It is sharp. And what's particularly interesting is how the analysis breaks down the song's techniques. It identifies clear moments of satire, like the wordplay with trump card and orange is the new white.
Clever.
Clever, yeah. And even using the figure's own reported words against him, like referencing deporting predators who grab them by the pussy. It's pointed satire, using his own language to highlight perceived hypocrisy.
There's definitely an element of mockery in there too, though, right? Things like small hands, the haircut, diet. Those feel more like personal jabs than, say, broader commentary.
They do lean that way, yes. But the analysis also points to moments of what it calls genuine critique, particularly those philosophical questions in the hook and the outro, like, do we lead with integrity or worship a brand? Is democracy strong, or are we building on sand?
Okay.
Those lines try to elevate it beyond just, simple mockery.
And the analysis tackles those questions of fairness and potential danger head on. It notes that while the tone is definitely harsh,
Very hard.
many of the claims in the lyrics seem to be based on documented events or public statements. The analysis argues this lends a degree of legitimacy to the critique, even within that satirical frame.
Right. It acknowledges the risk, of course, of alienating supporters. That's often just part of political satire. The main goal isn't always to persuade everyone, but maybe to challenge perspectives, to make people think. And when we think about the sacred here, the analysis argues the song directly challenges that sort of cultural reverence that often surrounds the office of the presidency itself.
Which can be dangerous.
Exactly. It raises that crucial point. Unquestioning reverence can be dangerous if it ends up shielding potential abuses of power.
The analysis uses this phrase prophetic art, which I thought was a really compelling way to put it, using wit and maybe audacity to speak truth to power.
It's a strong framing, and in terms of how effective it is, the analysis points to the song's structure, how the rhythm almost mimics a legal indictment.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And its thematic coherence and that balance it strikes between humor and, outrage. The humor doesn't really dilute the message. The analysis suggests it actually kind of sharpens it.
It's a powerful example, then, of how music can really engage with and critique something as culturally loaded as political leadership, maybe prompting us to rethink what we hold sacred in our political systems.
Definitely. A very potent example.
Okay, let's take a sharp turn now. Our second case study is also from the Pink album, but very different. This one's called AO8 972 I Am Your God. The analysis here paints a picture of a totally different kind of sacred subversion.
Absolutely. While the first song went after political power, this one really takes aim at traditional patriarchal religion.
Yeah.
It introduces this new, deliberately provocative, feminine deity figure named Liz Hadbuck.
Right from the start, yeah. It rewrites the Lord's Prayer. Our mother who stands in stilettos, Liz Hadbuck's be thy name. It sets the tone immediately.
It really does. And the lyrics just keep deconstructing traditional religious ideas, challenging male-dominated myths with lines like Zeus and Jesus, male myths, shaky scripts. It also directly confronts ideas around purity culture and sexual shame, asking, you think it's taboo to worship my skin?
Yeah.
And there's this really interesting critique of consumer culture kind of woven through it all, too, isn't there? References to having Hadbucks in your veins, upgrading to the supersized deluxe at the drive-thru.
It almost feels like it's playing with the idea of celebrity and influence as a kind of modern religion.
I think that's exactly what the analysis suggests. It beautifully unpacks all these layers. It sees parody and satire in the rewritten prayer, obviously, a clear critique in challenging those male-centric creation stories.
Okay.
And then this fascinating use of irony and subversion in lines like, call me sick, call me cruel, worship yourself, then call it odd. There's even this layer of like self-aware campiness, big booby trapper Ferris wheels for hoops, and ultimately that bold statement, "I am your God," works as both iconoclasm, tearing down old idols, and creating a new myth.
The analysis talks about sacred inversion, how that can be liberating.
Exactly. By flipping the sacred on its head, art can potentially free us from these unquestioned norms and carve out space for totally new ways of seeing things.
The discussion around taste versus tension here is really good, too. The analysis basically says, look, this song means to be provocative. It's trying to challenge our built-in ideas of what's appropriate or holy. It draws parallels to other art throughout history that cause scandals by pushing boundaries.
But it stresses it's not just about shock value, right? There are layers of intellectual critique, there's this fully embodied persona in Liz, and there are even moments that resonate emotionally.
Yeah, and it highlights how the song reinterprets sacred concepts. So instead of God the Father, you get Liz the Mother. Instead of heaven as some pure realm, you get earth as this place of, like, eroticism and chaos.
And instead of shame being the big sin, the song flips it and suggests maybe shame itself is the real problem. The analysis calls it sacred inversion, used as a tool for liberation.
And it connects this to a really rich lineage. Culturally and artistically, it mentions artists like FKA Twigs, Beyonce, shows like South Park again, even Greek tragedy and drag performers. It feels really layered.
It's incredibly multifaceted, and ultimately, the analysis boils it down to this really potent question the song asks. If God is a brand, then what does that make you? It suggests the song isn't just mocking religion, it's really challenging the whole way we make meaning in modern life, our identities, our relationship with gender, our consumer habits, our entire belief systems.
Wow. Okay, so looking at these two songs together, quite different, but both subversive. What broader insights can we maybe pull out about sacredness itself and this whole act of subverting it through art?
Well, one of the key insights I think that the analysis really brings forward is that sacred isn't always the same as holy or virtuous. Often it just means what's protected, what's considered off limits for questioning. That could be a political ideology, a religious institution, or, yeah, even the power of consumerism.
Right.
These songs, in their own ways, are challenging that protected status. Not necessarily because they want to desecrate something genuinely holy, but more to question the power structures that protect those things.
That makes a lot of sense. The Trump song goes right after that often untouchable image of the presidency itself. And the Liz Hadbuck song questions these deep religious narratives and even how we relate to brands and consumer culture.
And it's fascinating how the Liz Hadbuck song, by rewriting religious language satirically, almost becomes its own kind of postmodern scripture, doesn't it?
Yeah, it kind of does.
It blurs the line between satire and the kind of myth-making that religions themselves are built on. It reminds us that power often lies in the stories we tell, and maybe more importantly, the ones we don't question. By creating this new deity, the song is reclaiming that narrative power.
The analysis also brought up this anthropological idea of ritual reversal. Could you unpack that a bit? It sounds interesting.
Yeah, it's drawing on anthropology. This kind of subversion can be seen as a form of ritual reversal. Think of traditions like Carnival or Mardi Gras in some cultures where for a short time, normal social rules and hierarchies are flipped upside down.
Okay.
It's often seen as a way for societies to understand and maybe even reinforce their usual structures by temporarily inverting them. These songs seem to be doing something similar, artistically, whether it's using the cadence of a legal indictment against a president or using liturgical parody to sort of deify this new figure. It forces you to look at the familiar from a completely new angle.
That's a really helpful frame. And maybe one of the most effective things about this kind of critique is that it's often, as the analysis said, dressed in play. The humor, the theatricality, even the, overt sexuality in the Liz song, maybe they work to kind of lower our defenses, make us consider things we might otherwise just shut down.
Exactly. The analysis suggests the seductive nature of the Liz character, for instance, isn't just for show. It becomes a tool to engage us with these deeper, maybe uncomfortable societal issues.
It's like these songs are holding up this, funhouse mirror to how sacredness itself might be changing.
I think so. While maybe traditional religious faith is shifting for some people, we're still directing that reverence somewhere, aren't we? Towards new altars, social media followings, political tribes, brands, consumer culture itself.
Yeah.
And these songs seem to be trying to expose that migration of belief, that shift in what we choose to worship.
Absolutely. Which then brings up a really practical question, especially for anyone listening who might create art or write commentary or even just share things online. Is it ethical to even post something as potentially provocative as these songs?
That's a huge question. The analysis tackles this by looking at ethics from 4 main angles.
Right.
The intent behind the work, its potential impact, the responsibility of the creator, and then considerations around consent and community.
Okay, let's start with intent. What are the ethical thoughts there when you're making something that critiques the sacred?
Well, the core idea presented is that art aiming to critique power or expose hypocrisy or challenge norms isn't automatically unethical just because it might upset some people.
Right.
In fact, sometimes that discomfort is necessary to start important conversations. The crucial thing is to examine the motivation. Is it coming from a place of ignorance or hatred, just wanting to mock? Or is it a genuine attempt to unpack complex ideas that maybe need reevaluating? The analysis suggests both these songs seem to operate with an ethical intent in that sense. They're exploring belief, power, shame, identity, without really resorting to dehumanization or spreading outright lies.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
What about the potential impact then? Could they actually be harmful?
Art that hits a nerve often gets strong reactions. It might offend some people, it might trigger difficult feelings in others, a whole spectrum. But the analysis tries to draw a line between causing offense and causing harm.
What's the difference there?
Harm implies something more like intentional cruelty, manipulation, or exploitation. While these songs could certainly offend listeners because of their themes or their tone, the analysis argues their underlying goal seems to be sparking discussion and reflection, not deliberate harm. It does add a caveat, though, that provocation just for provocation's sake without much thought behind it could be ethically questionable. But it frames these songs as aiming for deeper engagement.
And then there's responsibility. What does that look like for the artist or creator?
Ethical art, according to this analysis, often comes with a degree of accountability. If you put challenging work out there, are you prepared to stand by it? Are you willing to maybe explain your intentions, listen to criticism, and perhaps even reconsider things if genuine unintended harm seems to be resulting? The analysis suggests that if the creator is open to that conversation, it aligns with ethical practice.
Okay. And the last one was consent and community. How does that apply here?
This angle looks at whether the work violates fundamental rights or maybe breaks established community standards like inciting violence or hate speech or violating privacy.
Right.
The analysis concludes that these songs, based on what's presented, don't seem to cross those lines. They're operating within the realm of free expression, offering critical reinterpretations, not, say, plagiarizing sacred texts without any transformation. So from that angle, sharing them could be seen as ethically okay.
So, the overall take seems to be sharing these songs can be ethical if the intent is thoughtful, if the goal is conversation more than harm, if the creator is willing to be accountable, and if it stays within legal and ethical boundaries like free speech.
That sums it up well. But even with the best intentions, provocative art can still cause offense. So what do you do then? Does the artist just apologize?
Well, the analysis offers a really helpful way to think about responding. First step, recognize that offense isn't monolithic. There are different types of offense.
Sure.
Like, is it based on a genuine misunderstanding of what the artist meant? Is it rooted in someone's personal history or hurt? Is it simply a fundamental disagreement with the message? Or sometimes is it maybe bad faith outrage just trying to shut the conversation down?
Ah, right. Different roots require different responses.
Exactly. The appropriate response really depends on where the offense is coming from.
And the analysis also asks a really key question about apologies. What is the apology for? Are you apologizing for the content, for the actual ideas you explored? Or are you apologizing merely for the fact that someone felt uncomfortable? Do you still stand by your message, even if the delivery was provocative? An apology doesn't have to mean retracting your core point, but it can be about expressing empathy for someone's distress.
It also distinguishes between apologizing and being accountable. Like instead of a full retraction, maybe the response is clarification or expressing compassion for someone's hurt. Or maybe even setting boundaries if the criticism isn't constructive.
Right. The analysis gives some hypothetical examples using the Liz Hadbuck song. If someone finds it deeply offensive to their faith, a response might be to first acknowledge their feeling, I hear that this was upsetting for you.
Yeah.
Then maybe clarify the intent. The song uses satire to challenge dominant narratives, not attack individual faith. And then perhaps appreciate their honesty. Thank you for sharing your reaction.
But if they still demand an apology?
The suggestion is you might say something like, I don't retract the ideas explored, but I do regret that the piece caused you distress, and I hope it might spark reflection alongside the offense. You're validating their feeling without giving up your artistic ground.
The final thought on this in the analysis is really powerful, I thought. It basically says, offense can sometimes be the price you pay for art that actually engages with important, difficult issues.
Yeah, if your work never makes anyone uncomfortable, maybe it's not really challenging anything.
Exactly. The goal isn't necessarily universal comfort, but maybe standing behind your work with integrity, self-awareness, and, yeah, empathy where appropriate.
Ultimately, it's about aiming for thoughtful engagement, not just desperately trying to avoid any possibility of offense. Knowing when to clarify, when to show compassion, and when to hold firm to your vision that's crucial for anyone creating in potentially controversial areas.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, I want to talk directly to you, our listener. These songs, as our analysis really brought out, they weren't made to be, background music.
Definitely not.
They were made to confront what we as individuals, as a society, hold sacred. Whether that's political power, ideas about purity, systems of control, consumerism, or maybe just the narratives we've inherited without really thinking about them.
Mm-hmm.
They push us to ask, what if the things we treat as untouchable aren't inherently holy, but just fiercely protected?
And listening today, you might have felt amused, maybe challenged, perhaps even a bit empowered, or, yeah, maybe even offended. And that's all valid.
Totally.
These pieces weren't meant for passive listening. They were really designed to spark awareness, to make you think.
We're not here advocating for just thoughtless mockery or causing offense for its own sake. Not at all.
Right.
But we do believe in the power of asking questions, right? Yeah. The potential for insight that can come from a bit of irreverence, and the importance of reclaiming our own voices and narratives.
Because as these songs and our analysis of them suggest, we live in a world where, yeah, politics can often look like a religion.
Absolutely.
Where religion sometimes adopts the strategies of branding, and where branding itself can become a kind of belief system we die into.
So as you go about your day after listening, maybe just consider, what are the things that you personally hold sacred? Why are they sacred to you? What might you be protecting or maybe resisting when those things get questioned?
And where do you see those dynamics? We talked about politics as religion, religion as branding, branding as belief playing out in your own life or just in the world around you.
That very tension, that space between the sacred and the critique of it, as our whole exploration today has shown, that's often where the really meaningful art happens, where deeper understanding is born.
Yeah.
Questioning the sacred, even when it feels uncomfortable, maybe that can be a powerful and perhaps even in its own way a sacred act itself.
A really interesting thought to end on.
We hope this deep dive has given you some valuable things to think about and maybe, just maybe, inspired you to explore some of those previously untouchable areas in your own thinking.